Hello, heroes. I'm Travis Hightower. I'm the host of the Slava Heroyam podcast. And right now I can't find my Ukraine shirt or my hat. So if you're new to this channel, I am not a journalist. I am a storyteller. And my purpose is to tell the stories of the legends and heroes that are coming out of the Ukraine conflict. And do so to tell you the true stories in detail of heroic individuals. So that we can place ourselves in their shoes. And I do this to both combat propaganda and let people become more familiar with Ukraine and how connected we all truly are. Last couple of episodes of the Slava Heroyam podcast, I've found it necessary to talk about the Iranian conflict. I was an air battle manager on E3 AWACS. We had one of those destroyed recently. And we also, this is not our top story today, but we also had an F-15E go down. What I want to share about the F-15E is, look, here you'll see it has two seats. It has a back seat and a front seat. Now, there has been a lot on the news about this, and instead of covering that for you, I'm going to recommend a fighter pilot channel. And that channel is William Spaniel, who has written a book being fighter pilots, but he did a video recently.
You don't find yourself on a book
on this F-15 rescue situation.
cruise by accident. You book it, I'll get your guide.
If you're a man who makes at least $150K a year and you feel self-conscious about your gut sticking out, I'll get you shredded or you won't.
The Iran war has been...
So William does a good breakdown here of what actually happened. So another good person to cover.
On Friday, an F-15E was shot down.
Mover is a former F-16 and F-18 pilot. So I highly recommend CW Liam. He's also an author and storyteller. I have never talked to him personally, but he is a good person to listen to explain what happens when a fighter plane goes down. I want to talk about briefly that everyone should understand that rescuing the pilot happened relatively quickly, that this type of aircraft would not have been flying alone. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories of, since the backseater was a colonel, that they flew out there alone and basically ejected on purpose to run some kind of psyop involving nuclear material. But that kind of conspiracy theory is kind of the most tinfoil hat type description that I've seen. And, you know, it almost even starts to sound plausible. The reason it starts to sound plausible is because nobody trusts what this administration is doing in terms of this war. And when I say nobody, I mean, you know, there's all kinds of coverage on how even media that is traditionally supportive of this administration is not so supportive on these events. And that's all I want to say politically. But what I want to say to my audience is not just be careful about information, but ask yourself where your trust is. Because in our rage and in our fear and our inability to understand how much money is being spent on a conflict like this, and how it could possibly even be successful and how we could open the strait. We can talk about how we can open the strait if we want to. I may do that more next week if I have guests on. But the administration is trying to gain more and more control over the military. You can tell that by how many generals they fired. I think we're up to 14 now, including the highest ranking member of the military recently. And that sparked controversy and discussion. I'm not so much concerned about the firings as that I want everyone to continue to understand that that doesn't mean that your military is suddenly under direct control of the whim of one person. They want to get there. That much is true. That much I can debate from a strong position with lots of evidence, at least. But we as the American people have to try to hold on to the trust of our military for as long as possible. There's a lot of people can both side this about how politicians want to take credit for things The current administration is particularly egregious about wanting to take credit for good things and never, ever apologizing for bad things. It's just the way, I mean, it's literally in that book, The Art of the Deal, is you never apologize and you take all the credit. But that's also something you can study from a psychology standpoint. But I am begging my audience, if you're listening to me for the first time, to trust that the military has plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D for getting pilots back. That when civilians are hit, even though the leadership and the administration seems like the kind of people that would order the deaths of school children, you can still trust that your military would disobey those orders. And that disobedience is why you end up with 14 fired generals. And that's speculation on my part. You hear all this talk of like a blackmail mob boss type back and forth where you want to, I'm going to destroy your asset if you don't give me my access to my other asset. I will destroy X if you don't give me Y. Is not how you run a war. And when people say, hey, I voted for this because he was a good businessman, well, next time that is on your rationale, remember that the business of the world includes being commander-in-chief of an armed forces and dealing with situations and world leaders who do not want to do a deal, especially if you've kicked off the war. I think I'm getting a little bit off track. My main point about this F-15 shoot down is that you had a normal operation and then you had a more complicated operation. And the more complicated operation was very similar to something that happened in 1980 called Operation Eagle Claw. There's all kinds of books on this operation, but essentially you had a landing site called Desert One in a field in Iran where they landed helicopters and a C-130 that was refueling those helicopters. Does that sound familiar? So if you're not aware of the full situation of rescuing the colonel, who's the backseat guy, we don't even know the names of these guys yet. I'm sure I'll go into articles on them as soon as we know something, because they are heroes just for surviving and getting home safe. But you lose 3 C-130s. They have electronic jamming packages, things of that nature. And they also need some of them for refueling the helicopters. They had a whole commando team. Why do you need all that to get one guy? It depends on the opposition. And the opposition, they've already told you, Trump has more than we're supposed to know, probably. We're not supposed to know the CIA would be involved. But there's just things you should not talk about in a rescue operation. And I know it doesn't seem like transparency to not be able to talk about that. But history will show probably something similar to Eagle Claw happened. You tried to land in the desert, you had a fiasco, you had to blow that stuff up, and then you had to try again because you already had commandos on the ground. No big deal. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. And it doesn't need to be debated what the paycheck should be to get your own people home. That is just another cha-ching that you can add to a war when, wars cost money. And I can tell you what kind of war would cost a lot less money and a lot less rescue operations and a lot less tankers having the opportunity to run into each other and a lot less AWACS being destroyed and a lot less drones striking American troops is if we had done a no-fly zone in Ukraine. And it's not too late for that. I will advocate that every time. But first, I want to talk about human safari. I talk about this every episode. It's in the QR code up there in the corner. Human safari is when the Russian military deliberately hunts down and tries to kill civilians. The most egregious offense of this is with FPV, first-person view drones with grenades strapped to them, and they fly them at civilian cars, ambulances, hospitals. If you got an open window, it's going to fly through your house, into your house, and get you. They can do a lot of damage with these FPV drones. And on the city of Kherson, which had 400,000 people, now just has 60,000 and is under constant bombardment by, essentially, they have mined the sky. And you have people trying to shoot down these drones. But in Kherson, we actually lost 2 more. So this is every week I do a memorial section for Ukrainian civilians that I've discovered haven't been did not make it, but were victims of this Russian terror campaign. So I want to, is there a way to oh wait, that's right. Duh. There we go. Now you can hear me. Okay. This, shoot. I thought this would have her name on it. Dura? It's like Dora. I gotta get her name right now. Dasha. All right. So on the right there is Dasha. She's 20 years old. Their village in the Sumy region came under artillery attack. Dasha and the whole family was in the home. Dasha covered her 6-year-old sister with her body. Artillery struck the home, killing Dasha, and the young 6-year-old fought for life. Yevgenia, I believe she fought for 1 or 2 days. She did not make it either. Sometimes human safari is as simple as an artillery strike. And you'll find with a variation that the human safari happens that there's no real safe place in Ukraine, because sometimes even the most far western cities are subject to terrorist bombings now. The theme of what we've lost this week is teachers and sisters. In Kherson, Irina and her sister perished thanks to Russian artillery. The artillery comes when the human safari isn't working. When the drones are starting to run out, they aim the artillery and just try to waylay to the city. The problem with the Russians is when they just bombard the city with artillery, that will give away their artillery positions, and the Ukrainian drone units will then attempt to strike the artillery. Otherwise, I think they would just bombard Kherson until there was nothing left. And the Kherson is separate from the Russians by the Dnieper River. So the Russians are on one side of the river and the Ukrainians on the other. And Irina got caught up with her sister, Marina, M-A-R, Marin, is it? The Stupak sisters. One of these days I'm going to start speaking better Ukrainian. I will have to dedicate myself. Both were school teachers in education. Both Marnia and Irina, probably in a car on their way from somewhere. And I'm surprised it said they were killed by artillery if they're together. Might have been in a home. But we remember that Russia is a terrorist state, killing teachers and sisters. Another sister we lost, this time from Shahid drone, Anastasia, 13-year-old, from the... Oh my God, now there's another one. Oh, is it? Jesus Christ. All right. Anastasia's from the Mykolaiv region, and she was struck by a Shahid drone that struck the center of her village. So sometimes when you're in the villages, you feel a little safer than the cities, but the drones will go after your villages. The town of Kramatorsk was hit by an airstrike. Just dropping FAB-250 aerial bombs was coming from the Su-25s. So this type of thing can be an accident, but a bunch of houses were hit. So, is there a world where the Russians fight fair and Olena, this school teacher, dies because of accidental bombs on April 3rd? Sure. But at this point, with a human safari that goes on, you can't consider anything the Russians do an accident anymore. And when I was talking about earlier about having trust in our military, when you start to blur the line between what the administration's rhetoric and what you think your military is capable of doing, you end up with a military that is just that you feel is just going to outright attack civilians. And if the populace feels that way and is unable to hold people accountable, eventually you have a military like Russia's that consistently terrorize the populace. So we do not want to go down that path. We want to call this out for what it is and not become that, and not let ourselves think that our military is anywhere near this type of atrocity level. But in Nikopol, a 76-year-old woman, she looks good for 76, was killed by a human safari. FPV drones attacked a market 16-year-old was also killed. And it took me a while to get through. And there's one more. Another one popped up within the last hour. We lost a mother and a 2.5-year-old in Odessa. I saw an explosion in Odessa, so I was hoping no one had been hit, but we lost a mother and child. Odessa is a western city. It's supposed to be one of the relatively safer ones. Nowhere safe in Ukraine, and the way to make it safe is to close the sky. That's going to be the bulk of the podcast today. Last weekend, I went and I was honored to see a screening of this film, Children in the Fire. So, quick review of this film. It is about 8 different children that have been affected by the war in Ukraine. It is not freely available yet, but hopefully it will be soon, where everyone can watch it online. As the children tell their stories of what happened to them, some of them lost legs and had to recover. Some of them were kidnapped by Russia, had to find their way home. Those are the 2 big things that happen with the children in Ukraine. If they survive an attack, they're wounded. They lose parents. They become orphans. And their stories are told by a combination of them being interviewed and animation. And the animation keeps it from being too horrifying, but it does strike images in your mind of what the horror must have been like for these children. And we got to speak with the director of this film. His name is Evgeny Afiniski. Evgeny Afiniski. Somebody, I guess you can just call him Eugene Afiniski. A little bit easier for a uneducated Texas guy like me in other languages. But he was born in the Soviet Union, and then he became escaped and became a citizen of Israel. And he has been doing documentaries since the early 2000s. But his first big documentary was Winter on Fire, which was about the Euromaidan in Ukraine. And then he did a follow-up film called Freedom on Fire, which fills in a little bit of the gaps between 2014 and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then his most recent film, Children on Fire. It almost makes Children in the Fire. Almost makes a tragic trilogy. I'm going to stop the podcast here for the year of our Lord, April 7th, 2026. But I'm going to do a 30-minute edited follow-up of our interview that will probably come out Thursday at this point. I'm about a day behind because of Easter, because I've been very interested in keeping up with what's going on with the Artemis mission. There's a whole other universe where all I do is talk about that Artemis mission. But I hope people are finding hope in that. And if you want to debate me later on it and don't understand why we're going back to the moon or what value it has, there's all kinds of value that I can tell you about. Not because it doesn't come from my military or intelligence background expertise. It just comes from me studying space all my life. So I know how much the Artemis mission cost. But something about the Artemis mission and this is maybe a good thing to close on. Something about the Artemis mission. I have a Saturn V rocket here signed by John Glenn. Something about these missions. When you look back at the Earth and you think about Ukraine or even Iran being super far away, it's not. We all share that same planet. Everything one country, one neighbor does to another affects us all. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner all this fighting and terror that we're inflicting on each other can stop. And that's maybe the true value of space. Eventually, we'll probably end up fighting over the resources in space. But if we can remember just the awe and the drive to move forward and break past our boundaries, if we can remember that as we go along, maybe we can keep the future fighting to a minimum, become more like Star Trek than The Expanse. And that is my hope and prayer for the future. So I will end this particular episode, episode 28 of the Slava Heroyam podcast, saying thank you, saying glory to those who support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Slava Ukraini and Heroyam Slava. And